It is continuing today after the state asked for him to undergo psychiatric observation. Just reading the newspapers once again, I think if people began to lose a little bit of interest in the Oscar Pistorius trial, suddenly interest has peaked yet again. And I'm just reading a headline here in the newspaper. This is from the Times saying, Oscar Pistorius is a danger to society and should never have been allowed to carry a gun. Pistorius' defense team had to rush in for damage control after forensic psychiatrist Dr. Merrill Foster, a witness for the defense, admitted to the prosecution that the athlete was a danger to society. Chriselda Lewis has been following this case very, very closely from day one. Chriselda, you all thought that this was it. You were going to be able to wrap this up and call it quits at Oscar. Meantime, this has now taken a completely different turn. I mean, a danger to society? Should this not have been brought up right at the beginning of the trial?
Well, I tell you, Leanne, quite an about turn in the Oscar Pistorius murder trial. Just when we thought it was all over, as we expected the defense to wrap up its case this week, Dr. Meryl Streep went on and testified that Oscar Pistorius, as you've pointed out, is a danger to society and should have never been in possession of guns. We also heard that despite achieving all the acclaim on the track, the celebrity and the wealth, that Oscar Pistorius had a self-image problem and was embarrassed of his disability. While following the testimony of Dr. Merrill, basically the state now wanting Oscar Pistorius to undergo psychiatric evaluation, mental evaluation. If the state succeeds in that application that they will bring to court this morning, Oscar Pistorius will undergo that evaluation for 30 days. We've also heard inside court that Oscar Pistorius, when he was being evaluated by Dr. Merrill, Oscar Pistorius had indicated how sorry he was for Reeva Steenkamp's death. And we also heard the psychiatrist say that Oscar Pistorius said that he felt guilty for what had happened on that morning. But the issue relating to the anxiety disorder that Dr. Merrill has diagnosed Oscar Pistorius with, let's talk a bit about that this morning. And joining me is Dr. Lynette Roux, who is a clinical psychologist, who'll give us a bit more details about exactly what this is. Dr. Roux, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I think a good place to start is to try and understand what an anxiety disorder is. What is it?
An anxiety disorder is a disorder where the person experiences high levels of anxiety, stress, worrying, and which would be out of the ordinary levels. It wouldn't be the normal stress levels that everybody from time to time experiences, but much higher than that. And depending on the severity, will impact on their general functioning on a daily basis, as well as their cognitive functioning. And I think that's important to highlight.
Is it common, though, in South Africa?
It is not unusual. It's not an unusual disorder, and unfortunately I think in South Africa it is relatively common due to the high levels of stress that we live with in South Africa, and because of the high levels of crime. People live with an underlying anxiety that they may become a victim of crime and may in fact have already been victims of crime, and therefore that adds to their general anxiety.
Is it treatable?
It's definitely treatable. Medication would play quite a significant role there, as well as psychotherapy. I do believe that this is a disorder that would need the combination of both in order to effectively manage and hopefully assist the person to overcome it.
I'd like to understand how, if one has this anxiety disorder, how does it affect your ability to distinguish between right and wrong? Does it at all? Because what we heard inside court yesterday is Dr. Merrill saying that Oscar Pistorius, because of his condition, doesn't react to things like a normal person.
I don't believe that an anxiety disorder would necessarily, I think it's highly unlikely that it would actually impact on a person's ability to distinguish between right and wrong. However, it would definitely impact on how a person would react to situations, especially if one considers the whole field of neuropsychology. And there's a lot of very recent and interesting research that's done on that, where once a person has learned certain behaviors, put into a similar situation where that neural pathway is fired up again due to a similar stimulus, they're going to react in a similar way, which could well be maladaptive. However, it's almost beyond their control.
Would you agree then with Dr. Meryl Foster that she said that Oscar Pistorius' reaction, for example, if he finds himself in a dangerous situation, is to fight instead of flight? Would you agree with that?
It's quite possible, yes, that would make sense. I haven't heard any of Dr. Meryl Foster's evidence. However, it would make sense in that if one considers the fact that he is also physically challenged, so he would not be able to physically, let's say, flight, which would be to run away, and therefore he would have to fight. And so his levels of aggression and anxiety in that situation would definitely impact on how he responds.
Now that Oscar Pistorius, if the state is successful in this application to have Oscar Pistorius evaluated for 30 days, does this assist Oscar Pistorius in his case? Does it not assist him? Let's get your expert opinion.
That's an interesting question, and I guess one that the court is going to have to decide. But at the end of the day, because I do think that this is a situation where it will all depend on what the outcome of the assessment is. If it is found that he is suffering from an anxiety disorder and possibly even post-traumatic stress, it could well be said that therefore his reaction in that situation is not the reaction that one would normally expect from a person who is not suffering from that, in which case I would consider that may assist his case. On the other hand, if it's found that he's not suffering from an anxiety disorder and that there's enough evidence to show in his past history, and that would also, the history of his previous behavior would become very important. If one could show that there's not enough to show that he's suffering from an anxiety disorder and therefore that would not impact on his behavior in that instance, then it could very well help the state's case.
Dr. Lynette Roux, thank you very much for your time. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. Dr. Lynette Roux there giving us some insight into what exactly this anxiety disorder is. Well, this morning we're expecting the cross-examination of Dr. Meryl Foster to continue, and after that the state to put through that application to have Oscar Pistorius mentally evaluated for 30 days. Whether that will happen inside this court remains to be seen this morning. Back to you, Leanne.